Right in.
Yeah. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Modern Web. We're really excited about this call. We have a great call for you in store today as we discuss the state of accessibility. This is the unofficial part two. We did have part one in May of 2021. If you do have any questions during the call, be sure to post them in the live chat.
Yes, thank you everybody for being very patient. One moment while I share my screen. This is the joys of doing live events, everybody. You're seeing the sausage be made. Okay. One moment. I guess we're just going to share my whole screen and hope for the best. All right. Thank you, everybody, as we said, for joining us here on A State of Accessibility. Please be patient as we get going here. But first of all, we want to thank our sponsors. Our sponsors include This Labs, a software development consultancy that offers architectural guidance, staff augmentation, on-demand subject matter experts, temporary CTOs, one-on-one pairing mentorship, and open source strategy support. If that sounds interesting to you, please feel free to reach out to us at hi@this.co. State of Accessibility is also brought to you by OpenDexecure, an open source cloud agnostic edge development framework. Need help getting started on multi-cloud serverless on the edge? Use OpenDexecure to simplify the setup so you jump into building the product you're passionate about. Learn more at their website, dexecure.com/open-source. If you like or support what we're doing, be part of the community by visiting our project at GitHub and follow us on our journey. As I mentioned, I happen to work for This one of our sponsors today. We are also hiring. So if you like the interesting people and characters that you see on screen here, and you think that that sounds like a team that you would want to be better a part of, please feel free to reach out to us at jobs@this.co. And of course, if you're interested in working with any of our clients, like we enjoy working with our clients, any of the ones that you see on screen, Twilio, Google, Roblox, T-Mobile, and many more, please reach out to us at jobs@this.co. As far as some upcoming events, this month we have our JavaScript Marathon returning. That'll be from November 15th to the 19th. We have our monthly Mentoring Women in Tech meeting, which is going to be hosted on November 17th at 7 a.m. GraphQL Contributor Days, December 7th to December 7th. State of Angular Ecosystem on December 9th, and our State of React coming up on December 14th. So if you enjoy this event, if this is your first one, welcome. If you enjoy this, we have many more events just like this that are coming up, so please enjoy. Our host for today, myself, I'm Rob Osell. I'm a team lead and software architect at This Labs, certainly on the less experienced side of our accessibility of our panelists, but certainly somebody that has become quite passionate and quite interested in this topic over the last couple of years in doing different work for clients and audits and being responsible for these things on different projects. So super excited to soak up the wisdom of our panelists here today.
And my name is Daisy Nolan. I'm a front-end software engineer at Trainual. You can follow me on Twitter at Daisy_Nolan. I am really like entry into accessibility. I was diagnosed with epilepsy at 16, and so understand how important it is. And as well as I taught special education to students. And so really excited for today's call. So we have an amazing group of panelists joining us today. So I'm going to let them just introduce themselves to you.
So starting with Carrie.
Saving the best for last, so I'll go first. My name is Carrie Fisher. I am a recovering front-end developer where I worked for 15 years, and now I'm proceeded into the accessibility space, having learned a little bit, and want to fix all of those things I did incorrectly originally. But I'm also a consultant for accessibility, and also I'm a PhD student in HCI at Iowa State. And this is my last semester, so I'm super excited about that, and I'll be able to dive into my research for digital accessibility. So looking forward to that.
Nick?
Nick, I think you are muted.
I was muted. Classic. So I'm Nick Steenhout. I'm an independent accessibility consultant. I've been doing accessibility for a very, very long time. Mostly I work with Fortune 500 clients to make sure that their websites are accessible, but also that they develop a culture of inclusion and accessibility within the company. If I may, I would like to plug my podcast, The Accessibility Rules Soundbite, which is a series of short conversations with disabled people where they can tell us what barriers they experience on the web, because it's nice to hear from the experts, but it's really powerful to hear from the people that we're doing this work for. So that's A11YRULES.com, Accessibility Rules.
I love that podcast. Nick always provides a transcript, and that's rare in the podcast world. Hi, my name is Anna E. Cook. I'm a senior accessibility designer at Northwestern Mutual. My job is to help empower my organization's designers to make their work more accessible and more inclusive by default. I've been interested in working within accessibility specialization as a designer for the past, well, for most of my career, but more so in the last few years. So it's been a thrill, and it's a thrill that I get to be on a panel with such amazing folks, and I get to chat with you all today.
All right, Marcy.
Hello, I'm Marcy Sutton. I'm a front-end developer and accessibility person. I learned when I was getting into accessibility and I met other people who were into it that it was really my community. I care so much about making the web more accessible that I haven't ever been able to turn that part of my brain off once I learned about it. So now I am an independent web developer, and I work with organizations on accessibility engineering and design reviews and some training of workshops, because really we're all in this together. And so sharing knowledge, hopefully we can make a dent in the inaccessibility in the world. So happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Tim Winfred. I am a front-end web developer and JavaScript web developer at Curative. I came from Fandango previously, where I sort of helped bring the world of accessibility into light over there. Got challenged with a task in 2018 and didn't really have anybody to look up to internally with accessibility. So sort of spearheaded that and brought it to Curative, where I am now. On Twitter, I talk about a lot of accessibility topics as well as imposter syndrome, because my ADD and anxiety just like make being a web developer a little crazy sometimes. So that's a little bit about me. Thanks for having me.
I guess it is my turn, and I think I'm the last person. And I realize my camera is all over the place. So, but that's that's the day after daylight savings time ends. But I'm Crystal Preston Watson, and currently I am the senior digital accessibility analyst at Salesforce. And if you're like, what is that? I actually do a lot of research, auditing, and kind of investigating of internal digital tools and processes and anything that people at Salesforce use internally to make sure that they are accessible and inclusive for all people to use, so to make sure they can do their job to the best of their ability. And before that, I've been in quality assurance, and I was kind of the accessibility lead, co-accessibility lead at salesforce.org. And I've also, a long time ago, was a front-end developer, a web editor at a newspaper. I've done a lot of things. That's me.
Great. Thank you all so much for being here and being on the panelists. I'm really excited to go ahead and start. So in our last conversation, so that was May 2021, But since then, there had been some edits to the WCAG 2.2. Is there anyone here that has knowledge with some of those edits and that can share with our audience about what's being worked through and or what's been, tweaked and changed?
I don't want to volunteer if somebody else is on the committee, but I recently had to do, I did a workshop, which we included 2.2 and 3.0. So I know a little bit about it, not the inner workings, but some really exciting stuff going on.
I want to hear what you've got to say, Carrie.
No, no, it's not that. It's not what I have to say. It's what we have to say. W3C and all of that. So I've been, we follow it as we do, and some of the things that I found, which is kind of interesting, based on that, is that we're getting some more success criteria. We're getting 9, but everything else for the most part is coming back over from 2.0 and 2.1. There's an additional change where Focus Visible went from level AA in 2.1 to level A in the 2.2 draft, last draft that I looked at. So some really kind of interesting stuff, but some of these are really kind of things that we're maybe already doing or already talking about, and some of these are different. So the 9, I'll run off the 9 real quick and their levels, but then maybe we can talk about some of these, because some of these I'm like having a hard time processing even how we would use those or integrate those. So the first kind of ones that I see here are the AA and AAA with focus appearance. So again, that's, we're already used to focus appearance, so that, focus indicator as we're tabbing through, but now we're going to have a color contrast minimum 3.1, I believe, on the AA and 4.5 to 1 for the AAA. So I feel like that one's pretty easy to understand. The other ones we have here are page break navigation. And what it sounds like to me on this is you have page break locators and a way to navigate throughout. So it almost sounds like old school anchoring like we used to have. And some pages still use it. Some websites use it to get to different sections within the page. So I thought that was interesting. And that's single A. So it's kind of one that will impact pretty much everybody. Dragging movements is the next one on there. So making sure that we can single point and drag and making sure that that functionality is in place. So that's a AA. Then we have the target size minimum, which Anna, I know that you talked about as well. So that's going up to AA, and we're having some more 24 by 24 minimum, which seems still kind of small, but that was interesting. And then the next couple ones are the ones that I think are a little bit newer to our conversation, is the consistent help. And that's a level A. So each page has information for finding help. So that could be like human contact or contact us page, phone number, that sort of thing. And that's really interesting because I feel like we have that on a lot of websites, but it hasn't been in WCAG before. So that's going to be interesting to see how that, and again, that's A, so it's affecting everyone. Then we have visible controls. So kind of extending some of the things that we've already done. But when a receiving pointer hover or keyboard focus, it needs to be visible, and that information needs to be to identify what those user components are doing and what's available. So that's going to be interesting. That's AA. So 2 more, accessible authentication. Each step in the authentication process relies on cognitive function tests. At least one other method must be available for our users, and that's an A. So that's going to have a big impact. And then the last one is redundant entry, and that is also an A. So information previously entered or provided by user, like if you're filling out a form, that would either be auto-populated or available for the user to select, maybe as like a drop-down. So those are the big 9, right? And that one is kind of a double the focus appearance. So I said a lot of words, but now you can all discuss. But it's interesting, yeah.
Yeah, so we did have a question in the chat about, do y'all have any idea when 2.2 will be official?
Nick, I think you're muted, but I want to hear what you've got to say too.
Geez, I keep doing that. Last I heard, it was going to go live at the end of Q4 this year. I'm not holding my breath. There's not enough advance right now. So probably my my gut feel is probably by mid-year next year is going to come through. What I really like about 2.2 is that, as Carrie was saying, it's actually quantifying some things that as advocates we were already saying we need to do this as a best practice thing. So now we're going to be able to say, yeah, actually it's got to be done. And the other aspect is it's exploring an area of accessibility that hasn't been explored before, which is cognitive accessibility. And this is why it's taking time to do, and there's not that many new success criteria, because quantifying and guiding people on how to make accessibility for folks with cognitive impairments is really difficult. But we're getting there, so that's going to be good.
As a relative layperson, I do appreciate the guidelines as they were written, that they do give seemingly clear guidance on how we should be proceeding on to support people in those areas. So the idea of pulling help, consistent help, and autofilling details, not making people re-enter them or giving people alternative authentication paths. I love the degree to which UX intersects with accessibility, that these are just great patterns for everybody. But certainly it's great that this is spelled out this way, because it will make it a lot easier for teams to do the right thing going forward.
That's the curb cut effect, isn't it? You build a curb cut for wheelchair users, and suddenly parents with strollers and kids on skateboards and delivery people with heavy packages, we all benefit.
I think as a designer, one of the things we have not emphasized accessibility for designers traditionally, but that's happening more and more. And one of the things that you see in these criteria, and all WCAG criteria, is that the harmony between usability and accessibility is really intertwined. And so having these guidelines updated, we're already talking about it with designers in my organization, though they are not established yet, because it helps them really understand and contextualize better usability as a whole. Though even if it didn't, it would still be important to make things accessible.
Did anybody else have anything to add about the 2.2 updates?
I was just going to add, kind of tagging off of what Nick was saying, not only do we not know when exactly it'll be official, I don't believe it will also be official, but you also have that lag time. Like if you think about it, like I know we have some clients still that aren't on 2.0, right? And 2.1 came out in 2018. So there is a little bit of a lag even once they're in. So, and it's unfortunate, and we're always kind of chasing the tech dragon, so to speak, where it's almost like we're being reactive. So I'm looking forward to some of the things that people are thinking about ahead of time, when like the 3.0 and beyond, where we're going to be a little bit more proactive. And this idea that there's all these new technologies that really don't fall under a lot of these umbrellas. Like I'm thinking, like AI or VR, XR, AR, that kind of space, where we're trying to figure things out on the ground. And it would be nice to have something like more of a umbrella that covered all of digital technology. And it's almost like, you have this umbrella and then you have like little pockets where it's like, okay, if you're doing this, then you kind of follow these pathways. So it'd be kind of interesting to see maybe some of that happen, and we'll again be a little bit more proactive.
Sorry, I did want to, sorry if I spoke over you. Yeah, and kind of following up a little bit with what you said, I would hope that maybe 3.0 would go a little bit more into mobile accessibility, because I love that we did get that, more success criteria in 2.1 that really touched upon mobile accessibility. I know for me, when I got started with mobile accessibility, that with 2.0, I was spending a lot of time trying to be like, okay, how does this translate for them, for native iOS and Android? And then, 2.1 became, the standard after I was not really in the mobile space. And and, but I still get a lot of questions from people because they're like, so how do, they're like, okay, I have 2.1, and then, we have we have success criteria around orientation and other, and other things dealing with mobile, but they're like, we need more because, when it comes to mobile, when it comes to AI and, virtual reality, things are just moving at this, speed of light. And, you have a lot of people who are new to accessibility but also are in these spaces, and they're just like, how do I how do I interpret this? How do I make this fit? How do I translate this into my particular area of technology? That may not, that isn't, desktop or desktop web.
I think
That's a
people
great
use. Oh no, I was just tagging up what Crystal said. One little comment is just like, I think sometimes that's what people use as an excuse to hide and be like, oh, this doesn't pertain to me because it's not explicit in these requirements. And so I feel like it's a bad idea overall to make it so detailed in that sense, like making it more broad to all tech. Then you can't hide.
Yeah, that was the great perspective and great example. That was the first piece of accessibility I ever saw. One of my students couldn't interact with a game of theirs. They were having like more and more vision loss like each month, and it was just getting worse. And they came up to me and was very upset because the game they were playing, they couldn't interact and couldn't, see things. And so I mean, I always thought, oh, web accessibility just for the web, but you always, I always forget about, games and, all different types of technology.
That's actually one of the things. That's why WCAG is slated to become AG, just accessibility guidelines. That's why the code name is actually Silver. AG is the
table.
Yeah, periodic table. Thank you. I was having a brain fart for Silver. So yeah, the hope there is that it's going to cover anything that is digital in terms of accessibility, but things are so far away. There's so much work to be there, and things keep changing. I think that really talking seriously about Silver is wasting time at this point.
Sure. So one of the things, this comes up in many different areas of web development as well. Some people struggle with trying to understand how much they should pay attention to TC39 or to this standards body or this faster moving one and this slower moving one. So we just were speaking about WCAG, but kind of curious y'all's opinions on the degree to which people that are interested in accessibility, how closely should they be following every ebb and flow of this? Should they be waiting for a final version? I get it for sort of wonks for people that are super interested in this. We follow all those developments, but how should people interact with this? And are there any other faster moving bodies that maybe have been starting to try to quantify these things in a less official capacity, but just as a way to help people learn and learn new techniques or learn new things that might eventually become standards? Are there any other sort of best practices, lists or places or bodies that you all recommend or look to for this kind of stuff?
One thing to remember is that the standards, the guideline, are the starting point. They're not the target. So it's really important to understand what the current standard is. As we were talking about 2.2, it's mixing in some of the best practice. So some of the stuff we're saying, hey, you have to do this for accessibility, but we don't have the backing of the standard. So it's important to know the standard, and it helps to know what's coming down the pipe. But ultimately, if someone really wants to learn and go beyond the standard, which is super, there's so many resources out there to understand what accessibility is about. And accessibility is not about the standards. The standards are here to help us. So it's a very complex thing. We can learn a little bit about everything fairly quickly, but to really understand what we need to get our hands dirty and just do it, and talk to other people who do it. Reach out to accessibility experts using the A11Y hashtag on Twitter. Go on the Web Accessibility Slack. Read what's on the Y website. There's really great resources there as starting points. And that's really where you're going to build your skills to a point where you really get it. And just run audits, test, use your keyboard only on your favorite websites, the one you're doing, the one you're using. Download NVDA if you're on Windows, enable VoiceOver, look at how things work, inform yourself and test it. That's really, by doing, you will become good at it.
Yeah, at
For
the
me,
end of the, oh, go ahead, Tim.
I was just going to chime in and say, for me, a lot of my stuff has just come from connecting on Twitter and LinkedIn with a lot of people who talk about these things. There's so much evolving regularly on it, and there's so many events to attend. Like, if you wanted, you can attend an accessibility conference every other weekend, every week, attend events like this online and pick up the information. And as you do it, you'll start to notice, like, the hardest part is actually going beyond the simple stuff, because the conversation usually stays down there because there are so many people who are looking to get into it or learn about it. So once you get that sort of base level, then you have things like AxeCon from DQ, which is how I met Crystal. And, as you're able to dig into it a little bit deeper. So there's so many places. Twitter is a fantastic community for accessibility conversations.
Yeah, I would say Twitter is also great for disability conversations, which there's accessibility Twitter and disability Twitter, and it's really important to have both of those things. But as far as WCAG fits into everything, at the end of the day, it's really important to make sure it works for users, more than, what version of the standard are we on? It's does it work? There is the fact, however, that in organizations, there are certain folks in management roles in particular who they really care about compliance. And often it's because they're juggling a lot of things. They have a lot of priorities. And so they're trying to not overwork their teams. So they're trying to prioritize, what's the most critical thing? What's going to be a big risk for a lawsuit? And so as you're trying to prioritize and pick the things that are the most critical to work on, WCAG can help to try and get some information around what's the most important thing. And sometimes if something is just a best practice, it might fall below that watermark of what is absolutely critical. So I think it's really great that the new standards are working in things that have been best practices, like Nick was saying, because that means that when we're in those conversations about prioritization, we can point to this new standard and say, "Yep, you got to do it," instead of the do we really have to do this? It's yeah, your website doesn't work with the keyboard. You got to make it work. But some folks really want that standard to just make double, triple sure that it's more important than some other critical bug on their website.
What Marcy said is very important when you're working with with teams and within some of these within a company, because you do have people that's their thing, that's their job. It is compliance, and and maybe they have a concern about accessibility for personal, but their job comes out of compliance, and they they feel they can only do so much. But that's why for me, and this will probably give me a lot of people, I loved when people reach out to me, especially those who are very new to web development, accessibility, because I definitely let them know about the standards and guidelines, but I kind of try to impart of taking it beyond that, and really learning how to research things, because it gets if you get too focused on well, this is what this thing says, that you really, yeah, you start to only want to conform to that, you know, as a, you know, especially as a web developer. So I kind of, you know, impart a lot of, okay, you have these, you know, you say you have, you know, WCAG 2.1, and you have these guidelines, and, you know, really, you know, showing them how to take this and then go beyond that and really start to dig in to, you know, future proofing their, you know, their work in thinking, you know, beyond the guidelines. I really think that's a huge key to, especially, you know, inside of huger companies and just, you know, in corporations, is really, you know, helping those newer, you know, developers and people who are getting into web development to really not just understand the kind of baseline for accessibility, but really kind of, you know how to learn beyond and really start, you know, and do their own kind of like investigation into how to go beyond these guidelines.
So I'm kind of curious, like with the rise of remote working and remote, you know, learning, how do y'all think that the past year has changed accessibility standards, or at least the importance of accessibility in general? Like, do you think we will continue to see focus on accessibility as jobs and schools move back in person?
I think it was a positive outcome of a terrible situation, because things have improved, and some of the things we've been asking for users, for disabled users specifically for years, are coming about, right? I mean, it used to be that super small examples like Zoom, you know, you used to have to integrate with Otter AI or pay somebody to transcribe, and now they have some of that built in for free, and you just can toggle something. Is it perfect? No, because it's AI generated, you know, captioning. But is it better than the alternative, which is nothing? I would argue yes, it's better. And just this morning we were reading an article out of Peloton plus Microsoft AI, and about the live transcriptions they have on their classes and things like that, with Merrill Evans, who's like a big proponent of captioning. And one of those big hurdles was, you know, integrating that technology, that AI, to make it a better experience. Is it perfect? Probably not. Do we have a lot further to go? Yes, but it is definitely a start. And I think that kind of shutdown in some ways kind of put a highlight on that, because we were all forced to be in that kind of situation. That's just one example. I'm sure you all have more.
I want to add to this one. I keep seeing, I think I totally agree with what Carrie said, and always well put, Carrie. One of the things I'm seeing as people try to go back to quote unquote normal is the de-emphasis of accessibility. And it's really unfortunate, because during the pandemic, we learned how essential how much all of us need accessibility. And the idea that we should return back to what was is it's not what we should be doing across the board. And I keep seeing, and I forgive my, you know, I'm a little frustrated because I see these big organizations who are really emphasizing how we can be more productive in an office or things like that. But we need to look at people's productivity very differently, and we need to enable people to meet those expected productivity progress needs across the board. And so I guess what I'm slowly rambling about here is that there was great progress in terms of accessibility. Let's keep going, even as people are getting more vaccinated. We have so much room to do more. And I just want to see more leaders working towards this, because if we collectively look at remote work as less productive, what does that say about the people who need to be remote? What does that say about the people who need accessibility? Productivity is not met by in person. It is met through many different things. Sorry, I'm getting political here. But I'd love to see more. We saw just a touch of that in the pandemic, and there's so much room to do more.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Sorry, just want to say, Anna, never apologize for your passion. Your frustration is mild compared to my outright anger as to what's been happening. For decades, disabled folks were asking for the very accommodations that happened overnight, just about overnight, in the work from home COVID situation. And we were met with, oh, it's too difficult, it's too expensive, we can't make this happen. And suddenly, boom, everything was possible because everybody needed that. And now that we're going back to quote unquote normal, these accommodations are being pulled away. Whereas we've had 18 months, 20 months to show that it works. So there was a lot of great stuff happening in terms of work from home, and some large companies have decided, okay, we'll keep hybrid, or we're not going back to the office or whatnot. But overall, it's like we dangled access to a large segment of our society, and then we decided we're going to take it away. So Anna, you're a little bit frustrated. I'm outright angry about it. There, I said it.
Okay, you made me feel bad now because I was a half glass full kind of girl. Now I'm gonna have to retract. No, I'm just happy for the small things. Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to make sure everything you said was totally on point.
It's both things, because accessibility is political, and you should be outraged when what we've seen happen. I mean, that is right to be upset about it. I personally have like the duality of like, that's frustrating, but it kind of fuels me to see this little sliver of hope that there will be folks who also lived through this experience who will be like, oh yeah, I see the importance of accessibility in digital properties now. So I think we do have a lot of opportunities to like point to it as an example of the need for accessible tooling and, products that get procured, like HR tooling and all of these online services. So I think it's both things. Like we have that glimmer of hope and that example to point to, but it also is don't want to go forward being like, oh, well, back to discrimination. So yeah, I think there's that duality to it that we're living through.
There's one of my favorite Dorothy Parker quotes. I'm going to bastardize it. In-office work isn't natural; it's just common. And Dorothy Parker, you can look up the actual quote because it's a very good quote. And I had been remote before the pandemic happened, and one of the things is that I do my best work remotely. I don't like being in the office, mainly because I don't like open office plans, and and as someone who has social anxiety, usually open office plans are just they're pushed as, oh, you're going to you're going to work better with your team, and it's never like that, because it's because you need to have a lot of space to do that. And also, they're never really there's no focus on making these spaces accessible. So you do have, and so with and also what comes along with with remote work, and also intersection of especially when it comes to not just disability, but there are studies are being done, especially when it comes to like race, where a lot of employees and people of color also really benefit from remote work, and the a lot of transgressions and aggressions that happen in actual physical environments. And so I do hope to see, and I'm not saying that in office means for everyone, that is, who has disabilities or is a person of color, shouldn't be in office, but people have different working styles. We need to enable people to, to do the best work they can. And for a lot of people, that is remote. And and there's some people, like I have my husband loves going into office. I'm just like, that's awesome for you, that gets us time away from each other. But for me, I do my best work, and I feel I've done my best work since I've been 100% remote these last like 2.5 years.
Yeah, I've heard from some folks who feel, like a friend of mine who has ADHD mentioned that she prefers being in the office because it helps her focus better. And I think when it comes to how we look at work and the future of how we work, flexibility is really the key. People, as Crystal mentioned, some folks work better in an office environment, others work well from home. Personally, I like the idea of having flexibility, and gosh, it doesn't hurt that I can hug my cat as many times as I want each day. But that honestly, helps with my anxiety and things like that too. So I really think flexibility, I wish more leadership, business leadership and organizational leadership acknowledged that flexibility, we could do it before, why can't we do it now? And that people can thrive in both environments.
Circling back to accessibility, I love this discussion, but we're talking accessibility, and maybe we veered off a bit. This thing of working from home is excellent if we have a culture of inclusion and accessibility, and that means having tools that are accessible to our workers, Zoom meetings, open captions, that kind of stuff. And that's getting better because we had to do so much work in the last 18 months. But it doesn't remove the burden of what we do for tools used internally, even if we're in the office. And I'm hoping that the work that's happened, it's not just about making the web accessible, it's about making communications tool accessible, whether it's Slack, Teams, Zoom, intranet, whichever. And that's where we need to make sure that as organizations, we provide tools that are accessible, because I guarantee you, if you think, oh, but we don't have any disabled employees, yes, you do. 26% of the US population has a disability. That's 1 in 4. It's likely not a visible disability. Maybe it's someone who's got color blindness. Maybe it's someone who's got ADHD. Maybe someone got traumatic brain injury when they were playing football as a kid and they have concentration issues. Or maybe the flashing stuff is going to create migraines or seizures or whatever. So we have to make sure that the tools we use to work, whether remotely or in office, are accessible. Accessibility is not just about the web.
I think with this, I also feel like there's, to go off of what Nick said, there's a big thing about actually training people about the tools that exist. My mother, as she is aged, her eyesight has gone down, and I didn't, even before I got into accessibility, I didn't realize that it was an accessibility feature to increase the text size for her. And as soon as I did, she was like, oh my God, my life is so much better. So just simple things like that people don't realize, are an accessibility feature sometimes, that they sort of see as like, they shame themselves for needing it. Oh, I'm aging, I need this. So I feel like moving forward, the training, not just on the people who are creating the technology, but like putting that information up front. A lot of phones do it as well, put the text size as well, but especially for the older demographic, they have struggled in this digital world a lot more, learning to teach. Some of these 60, 70-year-old teachers who are learning to teach online were struggling more than the students. So I think that's a big area of accessibility concern as well.
And to kind of like expound on what like Tim is saying, but there's also situational limitations, such as, you know, I wear glasses. What happens if I break them? I don't have them. I broke my arm. You know, maybe my keyboard's not working. But so you would definitely want to make accessible, because you never know what's going to happen. You know, bandwidth is one. Not everybody has the same internet speed. So, you know, making your site accessible is not just making it accessible for people with disabilities, it's for everybody. Everybody can benefit, and you know, it works out of the box most of the time, and it helps with SEO. There's so many more benefits. You know, that's one. You know, Nick, you mentioned that people said their users are not disabled, and so thank you for, you know, sharing that. That's one that it always hurts when I hear people say that, and I'm like, you know, I have epilepsy. I do have a disability. You never can tell what, you know, somebody is dealing with.
I just want to say with Tim, and this is something where, you know, it is important to really start, you know, I think, you know, and this might, when it comes to accessibility, it's one of the things why I push really, you know, talking about, you know, the intersection of just not just with disability, but also thinking about social economic reasons, and also culture in race, because not everyone experience you know, disability the same. There is a focus, you know, when it comes to not, you know, forgetting that, you know, when people get older, that, you know, they're having issues, and that, you know, they become you know, kind of unseen population that may not get, you know, people to reach out and really, you know, show them the different tools that they have access to. But then also when it comes to one of the reasons why I'm so focused on mobile accessibility, because a lot of people don't have, you know, desktop computers. Their main computer is a phone, or, you know, or some kind of, you know, a tablet, and, you know, and so really making sure that, you know, they have, you know, access to these tools, accessible tools, and making sure that these devices are accessible is a huge, you know, thing. And also really getting education out there, not just, you know, I love Twitter, and you know, but that's only, Twitter only reaches a very, you know, kind of particular group. There are so many people out there that that are on Twitter. They don't care about Twitter. They will never be on Twitter, and they really, you know. And it's one of those things. I feel like it is. You know, I have the at least the energy right now to really try to seek that out. It's really important to make sure that, yeah, it's not just about creators and making sure they understand accessibility, but really teaching, helping others who need that accessibility to get, you know, the education and knowledge that they need, so they can, because a lot of people may not even know that these things could be accessible to them, and that they could, you know, they don't have to participate in, you know, in one particular way, and they have access to things.
I have to plug Crystal's accessibility talks real quick. I popped it in the chat for us if you want to pop that link in there, but Brooke with Accessible Taste, the Economics of Access. She gave a talk back in May on that YouTube channel. And it blew my mind. It was phenomenal. And there's some things that, even having been in the accessibility community for a long time, I hadn't really thought about, you know, and rural populations on top of that, with maybe broadband. And, you know, there's a lot of different kind of pockets of accessibility, or where accessibility could extend beyond what we're already even talking about today. But check out that talk by Crystal. I love all Crystal's talks for sure. But that was one of the ones where just like, it gave me goosebumps the whole time. So
it's interesting. Oh, please.
Yeah, just I've been prodded to tell a story that happened to me in terms of, you know, accessibility is good for everyone. I'm a wheelchair user, and I've been doing web accessibility for years and years and years. But in 6 years ago already, in 2015, I ended up slipping on iced pavement and falling off the sidewalk, and I broke my scaphoid bone. That's the bone at the base of the thumb right here. And I ended up in a cast that was going from my fingers to my elbow. My thumb was encased, and someone very helpfully told me, hey, you're going to go round and round in circles now, pushing your wheelchair. So a couple weeks later, a drunk driver burned through a red light and crashed into my car. And as it happens, I broke the left scaphoid bone and ended up in a cast, the same cast. So I joked and I said, well, I can go straight now. The point is, as an accessibility expert, knowing about accessibility, I went from being able to type 80 words a minute and interacting with the web and my computers in ways that was really good to being very limited and frustrated. I knew the tools out there, but I had to learn the tools in a way that was an actually everyday user rather than as a tester. So accessibility really does benefit everyone. I was able to pivot and keep doing my job because the tools were out there to be used. We keep saying this, and I think it's really important. Accessibility benefits everyone. At the same time, we have to be careful not to re-raise the population for whom we're doing this work, which is disabled people. So the primary focus is really for disabled folks, but it does benefit everyone, from the nitwit who breaks both his arms in a 2-week period to the mother who has a sick baby, and her only way to access information is, well, she's juggling a baby in one arm, she has access to the web on her phone, and there's so many levels of accessibility at play here. We really have to think about all these things.
Yeah. I hear that. As somebody with a small child, I can't tell you the amount of times I've had to try and contort my finger to hit a keyboard command and hit my mouse button because I have my child in my other hand. One of the things that's come up here, and I think this is interesting, is the different ways that people are engaging with our interfaces natively, how they understand it. This has been a historical problem with teaching generations that didn't grow up with computers how to use keyboards and mice. That problem continues in many households and in many families, mine included. But something that's sort of interesting, and I've seen develop more recently, are we're getting users online now for whom touch was their primary interface. And actually keyboards and mice are also an issue because they're sort of not primary to them. And so this is going to start becoming not just users, but also developers who are developing from that mindset, and a challenge for developers who come from a different mindset and developing for them. So I think where I'm overall wrapping this up is, what are ways that we can be better at helping broadcasting how our tools can be used, the features that we add, like onboarding new users and like getting and reaching them where they are, especially in mobile where so much is hidden behind swipes and different, configurations and moves that you have to make that you may have never used before. How do we get better at helping onboard users, onboard ourselves, and give people different avenues?
I guess I'm going to jump in. It's kind of like how when you're actually building this technology, documentation is very key, because it's like when you're on a team and you're, building out a feature, it's kind of one of the things I do not miss being a developer, of people of the teammates who would not document things. I'm not saying you need to write War and Peace again, but it's like, well, my code is the documentation. I'm like, no, it's not. It is absolutely not the documentation, and I need to have some kind of understanding. We are not going to mind meld here with your with the and I think that's the same, bringing that same energy when you're building to your users, is that there's that the saying, when you assume things, you make an ass out of you and me. My grandma loves saying that. And I like it. And so I think it's really about making, giving that information to users. And so when that's why having, like an accessible, along with, I actually don't, when you have like your technology, making sure, you can have like a separate, like, this is what all we're doing for accessibility, which is great, but also in the documentation as itself of like, this is how you use our product or our feature, that accessibility information is ingrained in that as well. And so that's kind of the number, like my thing, I can say that's the number one thing is having that information. And also, again, taking it back to the basics. I know a lot of us talk about, semantic code and things like that. If you're building with the solid building blocks, and that's not just code, but also design and, and other things, you're really going to, you're putting yourself in a great position. If you're just starting out with the new hotness and you're like, and not having the understanding of the fundamentals, you're just setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, Marcy, please go ahead.
Oh, thanks. I was just going to add on that along with the documentation piece, your interfaces should be intuitive. Keeping things as simple as possible will make it easier for people to figure them out. That kind of onboarding new user step. I mean, setting expert level tools aside, because I think there's that, things like Photoshop or Pro Tools, like there's always going to be these expert level pro tools. However, I think for a lot of more basic and general audience tooling and websites, making them as intuitively designed as possible can help with that. And then, not assuming that people can figure them out. That's where the documentation comes in. But I've worked with plenty of stakeholders and people in power positions who are convinced that their code is intuitive enough. And those are usually the folks that say, no, it's self-documenting. And I would say, put it in front of people. Let's survey some users and people with disabilities and find out how intuitive this really is, because we make a lot of assumptions that really feed into our own biases that something might be intuitive. So I think over time, you learn some of those tricks about what is intuitive because you've had that feedback from people to help you understand that. So I think it is really a design challenge in intuition as well as documentation that could help.
There's also a dichotomy between where do we put accessibility features in our programs? Do we stick them under accessibility settings where people who don't have disabilities will never think about going looking for them? Or do we mainstream them, if you want, throughout all the other preferences? Or do we do both? Because maybe it's going to be easier to do that. And every time I propose to do both. Have your settings in two places at the same time, one under accessibility where someone who's looking for accessibility will find them easily, but where someone who may think, oh, this font is so small, how can I make it bigger? They are not necessarily going to think about going into accessibility. They might go into display or anything else. So, it goes back to what Marcy was saying and Crystal was saying, make it intuitive, make it easy to find the places to switch stuff.
So many people, everybody's of course right on the money, as it were, but so many people who benefit from accessibility don't understand that they have disabilities or don't see themselves as needing accessibility. And then there's people who understand that they do benefit from accessibility. And so having intuitive, adaptable interfaces that understand levels of interactivity beyond visual is just a great start. And then of course, hearing from, actually making space for users to give feedback instead of spending hours in meetings debating where this button should go, those are just the core starting points of basic accessibility. And I think that all the time when I'm talking with like my family, there's so many things that they're using like my grandmother, for example, has text enlarged on her phone. It makes it easier for her to read. And she knows that she can use that in or access that in her settings in accessibility, but it makes so much sense for her. And she doesn't think about it in terms of I am this or I am that. It just is better usability. And so I think everybody, of course, here is right as always. Both is important.
See, and I think that this is the future of accessibility, just like what Anna was saying and Nick and everybody else here on the panel, is that giving users choice and giving them accessible choices, right? Where we have that dark mode, light mode, prefers reduced motion options, things like that, right? I can see a future where we have that beyond, right? Like all of the things I set in my operating system, they go out to everything that I own, even like Bluetooth over to my phone or something, right? So one ruling to set it all, or one rule to set it all, or one setting to rule them all. That's what I meant. One of those things. But it's this idea that giving people the choice, that's really going to be the future, because how can I know what 7 billion people really want? What exact combination? Because you're talking about operating systems and devices and ATs and preferences, right? And even situational preferences, like we've talked about in other terms as well. So I'm really excited about this. I know that we're just like at the cusp and just starting to get our toes like in the water for that, but it's fascinating to me. And I think that's where, you know, people like Anna and designers and UX people are really gonna push that accessibility into the forefront and really make it more mainstream.
I like to bring this up as an example. When you kind of hide your accessibility features away, one of the things that you get is one of the most asked questions of me a lot of times is, how do I get voiceover to stop talking to me? And because someone will accidentally, cut on voiceover on their on either their phone or on their on their desktop, and they don't know how to shut it off. And so they, I'll get a question of like a Slack or something. How do I stop this? And also, if you just like search for this voiceover, a lot of the voiceover articles are how to shut off voiceover. And the thing is that, and this is like, I know I'm focused on voiceover, but this is kind of indicative of a lot of when you hide it behind things, and, so not you're not providing that for all your users. And like, it's like, it might be harder for someone who is, undergoing visual impairment and now is finding themselves in need. And so it's harder for them. Maybe, they don't have information, and they may not discover, voiceover until someone tells them about that. But you also have it for people who are like, how do I shut this off? And then, then it becomes a tool of annoyance instead of like, when I turn on a certain thing and I'm like, oh, I can shut this off here. Then, for a lot of people, it's like, oh no, this is, accessibility things are quote unquote annoying. And so that's why, both is really good, especially to really kind of, stop this kind of weird, like, accessibility things are, kind of weird or whatever, annoying to some people.
Great. Now, this is a topic that I've sort of had in case I ever got a chance to talk to Marcy again. And but I love it because each of you in turn has been talking about this subject a lot lately, and it's running tests with real users. And Marcy, one of the articles that you've written in the past, this might be a while ago now, but it was really, really impactful to me. It was about user testing of accessible client-side routing. I do a lot of work with some of the like Angular, React, Vue, single page application frameworks. And routing is one of the hardest things to get right because it bypasses all of the browser's natural things that it gives you for accessibility and announcing when route changes and where the user is on the new route. And what stood out to me wasn't just the rigor of the study, but also that the conclusions weren't necessarily that definitive. They sort of suggested things, but there were others that preferred very different things. And so I was kind of curious to go around and maybe give stories about testing, how people should design their tests, and how to interpret those results if those results are ambiguous.
Sure. Yeah, I could start off. Yeah. Oh, client-side routing. I like the more time I've spent on it, the more I think we should just banish it to the sun. Because it is really hard to make something that works for everyone. In that study, I did it when I worked at Gatsby. And so routing was part of the framework. It used Reach UI or Reach Router, which I hear with React Router, they're not handling focus anymore, which, oh gosh, it's a tough one, because what we want to do is try and replace some of the behavior that the browser gives you for free when you have traditional HTML page reloads. The focus is reset to the top of the page, the screen reader will start reading. Something has happened. You didn't just click a link and stay where you were and not realize that the view has updated. But in a JavaScript framework, we have the opportunity to do something that's more guided. And we're trying to replace some of the behavior that's taken away by the browser, not doing that in a Java, dynamic JavaScript view, but maybe we can improve on it. Like, that's where I started off doing that study, was that I thought we could make it better potentially. But some of the things that worked really well for screen reader users didn't work so well for sighted keyboard users, for example, or folks with low vision, for example, focusing on headings, which are not interactive elements. And so if you're moving focus to a heading, that might work great for a screen reader user, but not for everyone else. So in the study, I tried to distill all of those findings into something that could work for everyone, which is kind of impossible, really. And so Anna made a point about making things adaptable. And so I wonder, in more complex web applications, if having settings that can help folks tell us what they prefer, like for focus rings always being visible, things like that, to make it more configurable. But then at that point, who's going to go through those settings and actually change those? I'm not sure. So I've just ended up with more questions than I have answers, unfortunately. But my hope, long term, would be that not only JavaScript frameworks would, give a rip and do something about it, because most of them don't. But I think what a lot of folks are hoping for, and just sort of paralyzed not doing anything, is that browsers will handle it natively. I think that would be the ideal outcome.
Yeah, I love hearing this from Marcy, because the more I've been trying to learn about, this is just personal, I've been trying to learn more about frameworks because so many teams are using them now. And long story short, JavaScript makes my brain hurt, but one day maybe I'll get it. But the thing about adaptability that I think is really interesting is, as designers, we're so focused on the visual aspects of design. And when we look at web experiences, we have to let go of that a little bit and think about in-depth user experience, like UI is important and visual is important, but so much of that is already adaptable. And in the future, users may have settings on their computer set up to just make things work a certain way throughout web experiences. Now, I'm being imaginative at this particular moment, but for example, we've got dark mode, where if you have the settings on your computer established to go to dark mode at certain times of day, like I do, you can get that set up where, heck, I think Twitter will respect that setting, if I remember correctly. I might be wrong, so somebody please feel free to correct me. But I think more and more we'll see experiences that are inherently adaptable, and that kind of makes us think about what design really is. And design, respectively, looks at users' preferences and says, okay, we're going to respect those preferences. That's, a brand has no value if it's not usable. So I think that's a really exciting part of the future we might be looking at.
I think a big part of it too is technology, that the device you're on, the browser you're using. iOS, I think, is notorious for having like focus management issues and stuff that I've developed. And, I've been told sometimes you just have to do your best to make it work. And if the technology isn't there yet, don't hack your way because they can change it tomorrow and then it breaks everything else. So it's like, a lot of old buildings didn't have ramps, and then ramps were decided to be the normal thing required, and then all buildings, and then elevators, all of that, all of those things that made it more accessible in the future. Those older items aren't, I mean, buildings and architecture is a whole nother thing, but digital technology, it's the same thing. It's like, if we try to hack around it now and make it work momentarily, how's that going to work in the future? Everything for years in web development was like, use a div, use a div, use a div. And then now we're going back to the more semantic stuff for a lot of it. And it's just fascinating how it's like you learn the fundamentals, you break the rules, and then you realize, wow, those rules were set for a reason. So I think that's what is going to happen with things like React and the front end frameworks. As they evolve, it's going to be like a marriage between the technologies and the frameworks that are going to eventually get to a point. But right now we're just not there, and you can only hack your way through so much of it.
Tim, thank you for mentioning learning the basics. HTML really is the basics. And I actually have a pinned tweet on my Twitter stream because about 70% of the errors I find when I do accessibility audits are directly related to bad use of HTML. HTML is not that difficult to learn. I think, if I remember the stats right, a 5-year-old knows about 300 words of their native language. There are about 115 HTML tags to learn. So it's not much to ask developers to understand HTML better than a 5-year-old knows their language. So just do it, learn HTML, and you will resolve so much of your accessibility issues right off the bat. You will not have accessibility experts repeat to you for 20 years. Use the alt attribute. You will not have them on at you to don't try and make a custom select. Use native HTML, and you will not have so many accessibility headaches if you use HTML properly. And yes,
But
it is a
Nick,
pet peeve of mine.
HTML isn't a coding language. Why would we want to learn that?
Do we have another 5 hours?
I will mention, just before I forget, I also want to emphasize that designers should become more familiar with HTML. You don't have to learn how to write it, but you should know what's native and you should know what's semantics so that you're not reinventing the wheel. And so that we're not asking developers to go out and create this really intense, like multi-select interaction where we could just use a set of checklists. So get familiar with what exists because it'll make things more accessible by default in your design. Tim?
There's Ian Pouncey, one of our colleague, has this great metaphor. He says, accessibility, if a designer gives a photo of a cake to a developer, the developer is going to have to try and interpret what they're supposed to bake. But if the designer actually knows enough HTML to say, okay, this is a heading and this is that, and actually gives the recipe, chances are the developer is going to be able to replicate what the designer had in mind properly to start with. And I think that goes back to what you're saying, Anna. I would so love for designers to have a modicum of understanding of HTML to make that happen.
A lot of the people who are developing and on the designing side as well are watching tutorials, and people who are, I just tweeted about this morning because I was watching a Jest testing tutorial yesterday, and the guy was talking about some way of targeting elements, and he was like, So if you notice, this input element doesn't have a label, and I went straight to the comments and I was like, that input element should have a label. Don't teach people how to work around, doing things in an inaccessible way just because that's what you know. So there's that knowledge transfers. I went to a coding boot camp and the topic of accessibility was never mentioned. You have people who are learning online through coding boot camps, through self-teaching, through even school, and accessibility is not once brought up. It's the same thing with people who are trying to learn React and their JavaScript skills are like still very beginner. It's like you can't jump to React without having learned. So you shouldn't be jumping to styling with CSS because CSS is, going to make things crazy until you've learned the basics of HTML and how to make your HTML work for everybody.
I actually, and I ended up going to a boot camp because I felt like, I don't know why, and this is after I had worked as a front-end developer, and I thought, well, maybe this is a way to, kind of brush up my skills after being in, QE for a while. And that was the main thing. And this is why I feel like it is, the kind of basics are a lot of newer developers, and and it's not just there's boot camps for UX and other things. There's not a lot of the newer people who are coming up into web development, into technology, don't have these fundamentals because a lot of these programs are not teaching them that. I remember being in the first couple weeks, and there HTML and CSS was really brushed over to get to the JavaScript frameworks. But then even then it was like, this is JavaScript. And then it was like, okay, now we're going to go to, React. and then, it's like, I was like, okay, cool. But can we one, learn about HTML and kind of like what, HTML, and not just talk about divs. Also, everyone's like, CSS is hard. And it's like, yeah, it's hard when you don't actually learn about CSS. And then it's like, is it, React or Vue or Angular or what, it wasn't Angular because when I went, it was like all about React. And I was the outlier learning about Vue. It was like, that's, you don't need to know HTML and CSS because React. And I'm like, in what world am I in? And that's what, and that's why I've created videos to talk about. It's like, hey, let's learn the basics, because you're kind of reinventing the wheel. And a lot of these, it's like, these are supposed to be, make things a little bit easier. These are, you're really complicating things. You're making things way complicated. You're like, when you can make a page, honestly, just using HTML, CSS, but, some people are like, but now I have to add JavaScript. And it's like, why? Why do you have to add JavaScript? And it's like, yeah.
Simple isn't sexy. I think that's what it is. I mean, honestly, this is all what you're coming down to, like the fundamentals. Like, there's over 87 JavaScript languages that are individual right now. Obviously some are more popular than the others, but why is it that we need that many languages to do essentially, similar things? So this idea, this fundamental, I think of HTML a lot as kind of a skeleton, and CSS as the skin, and JavaScript as like the functionality. So I think about it, it's like, how could I function without that proper skeleton and that, skin keeping it all together? Because I'd just be like a blob, with no bones, kind of jello around. Anyway, so that's what my picture when I think of JavaScript. It is essential for certain, functionality, but if you don't have that underlying structure in place, there's no point, right?
Well, great.
No bones about it.
There we go. Another amazing conversation has gone by very quickly. Of course, this is an important topic. This will certainly not be the last time that we'll be covering it here, or that any of these fine people will be covering it every single day on their Twitter accounts. I want to throw it around to everyone to give kind of their last thought or any shout outs or plugs that you want to do. I will start out and just pitch one of the things for anybody that was just listening to that conversation and you said, what do you mean? I thought all of the divs that I used were quite accessible. If you want to like start playing with this, other than reading the WCAG, the WCAG guidelines, which are written quite clearly, another tool that I've really enjoyed going through with people, especially in the context of frameworks, is the W3 has a WAI ARIA practice repository, which has just tons of examples of controls that are often implemented using frameworks and tells you very specifically what key presses should react in what ways, what roles should go in what places, and different ideas on ways to put things together. It is just a fun activity to just go through that list and rebuild them yourself in your technology of choice just to see how they work out. So if you haven't done anything with accessibility, that might be a fun place to start. And that's it for me. Daisy, do you have anything?
Yeah, so the best analogy I've ever heard is accessibility is a marathon, not a sprint. So if you hear all of this and say, oh man, I have to go to work and make all of this accessible, you just need to start building a habit. You're not going to wake up tomorrow and say, let me go run a marathon. It's going to take a lot of time and training. Just make that first step. Shout out, I really love Marcy Sutton's emails I get, that help me learn how to write accessibility or better accessibility, as well as like testing. So shout out there. And there are some great extensions and a lot of great, oh my goodness, like to-do lists that help you know like what you need to be doing for accessibility. If you ever want to chat, you can follow me on Twitter at Daisy_Nolan. I'm going to go ahead and send it off to Tim if Tim has any final thoughts.
Sure. I think the easiest way, if you're looking to get started, is literally go to your site and do a keyboard pass on it. If you can't, I was at Fandango and couldn't even get through the seat map flow because it was all built in divs, and had to turn them into checkboxes with roles. Long story. But so start with the keyboard path. See if you can get there. That's the most fundamental, basic way to start your accessibility journey. If you're looking more advanced, what I would start saying is learn how to Google in a way that you do as a developer, as a designer. Some of the overarching themes are keyboard, screen reader, touchscreen, as Crystal mentioned, with mobile devices is huge, and mouse. You might not think of that as an accessible thing, but as was brought up, the mouse is not something that everybody is using nowadays. And then to go from there is the color contrast and all of that design related stuff, and cognitive issues. As I mentioned, I have ADHD issues, and one of the most annoying things I've found is clicking on a little form input that's like add your birthday, or add a date or something, and it has the pre-filled in stuff, and then or it's like the email and the labels inside of it, and I click in it and I was like, wait, was that email or username? Things like that. Just anything display wise, visual. There's so much to dig into, and I would just create a checklist for yourself through each one of those. What do I know about that? Like you said, go find checklists. And last thing that I'll shout out is DQ. I mentioned it earlier. They have Axe Pro for testing your site. They have Axe Con. And then if you're a developer, they have Axe Core. So go check out all their Axe suite.
Great. Carrie?
I don't know that I can say much more than my skeleton blobby story. The way my mind works is a little weird. But, I think one of the things that I find fundamental, both at the very beginning of my career to today, is the community, right? And being involved with the accessibility community and hearing the different perspectives of the people who with these actual disabilities, right? I can only speak for my own experience. So I like to hear about others' experiences. So that's kind of getting into that UX realm. So, any way that you can connect, I think is key, because it's going to help you in any part of your career. And then definitely a shout out to Marcy and the group that started the W3C Alley Slack, the Web Alley Slack. It's where I met some of my best friends. I met a lot of you all there or on Twitter. So yeah, super, yeah, definitely do a shout out to that and Marcy. And definitely if anyone's interested, let us know because we got spammed a few years ago. So now it's invite only, but if you know somebody in the group, they can let you in. But yeah, so thanks Marcy and thanks everyone for doing that as well.
Anna?
As always, I think part of the reason these sessions always go so fast is because I get to speak with some of my favorite people, and it really fills my cup, so to speak. And I will say that getting to the accessibility community has made my career so much more fun, and that Slack is amazing. In December, I'm going to be doing a talk with A11Y talks called Why We Need More Accessibility Designers or Inclusive Designers. And so I think if you're interested in that, I would highly encourage folks to go to that. I cannot stop talking about accessibility and inclusive design, so it's nice for me to have an opportunity to funnel that into a proper context. But if you also are curious about my day-to-day thoughts, you can follow me on Twitter at Anna E. Cook. And I know the E, it's the brand. You may see that I have a label as a catch-up design advocate, and we can talk about that later, but mostly talk about accessibility and inclusive design. So thank you.
Awesome, Nick.
Well, I happen to be on Twitter as well, Vavroom, Vavroom. I tweet a lot, so beware. I guess the one thing I would like to remind people is accessibility is everybody's job, from the designers to the QA testers. And for the QA testers, I would like you to think that chances are you can't just run automated test suites like you do for everything else. You do have to do a little bit of manual work there. So it will pay to, learn HTML and figure things out. In terms of shout out, I would like to thank every non-accessibility organization and conference that actually include accessibility speakers in their lineup, because that is so important to get people thinking. Maybe you're going to see the program and you don't want to go watch the accessibility session, and that's fine, but it's there and it'll get you thinking about it. So please include us more and more and more.
Awesome, great. Marcy?
Yeah, thanks to those conferences as well, because that's been a big part of my career, and seeing those light bulbs go on from people who happen to be in the audience when I did one of those talks. Now they are accessibility champions. So it really does, that ripple effect is very real. So as far as plugging things, I could say one more thing about the Web Accessibility Slack. I'm the lead admin over there, and any member can invite people. So if you know someone that's in there, we can invite you, or you could reach out to us on Twitter. I'm Marcy Sutton on Twitter. And my goal with accessibility moving forward is to keep seeing those light bulbs go on by doing some accessibility trainings. And my little slice of the world is, since I am a senior interactive developer, I would say, I do a lot of JavaScript, having worked on some JavaScript frameworks. And so being able to speak that language with developers, I love talking about the interactions and mechanics that apply within the JavaScript world, but I'm always talking about the basics as well, and the culture of accessibility, because as Nick said, we can only get so far with automated testing, and we have to remember that we're building things for people, and people have a wide range of abilities. So I use that sort of position and audience to, sure, we talk about the complex things, but we always have to bring it back to the basics. And so if you want to get in on that, I've got some workshops coming up from my testing accessibility project. And it's really, the goal of it is to teach developers to incorporate accessibility testing into your day-to-day work. And I have a free email course that's been mentioned a few times. You can subscribe to get those emails. And then there are some workshops coming up starting on November 17th. I have a full day workshop on automated testing with JavaScript. And then I'm going to take a little pause in December and then start back up in January. So eventually there will be a thing, a larger project that you can watch on your own time, but I'm doing some live stuff until then. So thanks so much for having me.
Great. And Crystal?
I'll I'll be brief, but yeah, follow. Everybody on here has Twitter. I would say if you're not following everyone that's on here, please do, myself included. Though I'm more of I like to do trolley posts with a little bit of education in, and there'll be more of that in 2022 as I take a film course. So they're going to even be elevated. All about trolling for the good of accessibility. And just kind of really quick, I just want to say accessibility is a civil and human right. So it is not a nice to have. It's not something that you should push off into your second MVP. You need to do it right now. Also, kind of as well, pay your disabled testers. Don't be asking for freebies. People gotta live, they gotta eat, and so please do that. So if you're asking people to sit here and test your stuff, then you need to pull out the cash and pay them. And you know what, and nothing about us without us. So that's it for me.
Wonderful. What a great note to end on. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating on this panel, all of our guests here today. Thank you to our sponsors, This.Labs and Open Dexicure. And thank you, everybody that is watching this either live or in the future. Thank you to those of you that participated in the chat and contributed questions. And we hope to see you all next time for our next conversation. So thank you very much.